It's a great honor for me to be allowed and to be asked to introduce Pete Rose, the 89th and current president of APG. Pete has been and continues to be a friend, a counselor, a mentor, and a role model to me and to many of us in the audience tonight. A little bit of his background: he, of course, is a geologist. He has 3 degrees from the University of Texas, including a PhD with a dissertation on the Cretaceous of the Texas Gulf Coast and one of the definitive works on the Edwards Limestone Reservoir. I don't think he was on the football team. Is that true? Nothing in the bio about that, but he may claim that later on. He's had a very diverse career. I think that's kind of interesting. He started out as a shell geologist, something that's common to many of the legends of our industry. He's been a professor of geology at the University of the State of New York at Stony Brook. He's been the chief of the U.S. Geological Survey Petroleum Resource Assessment Group, which probably laid the foundation for some of the more serious attempts to quantify petroleum resources in the world. He was chief geologist at Energy Reserves Group, which is the predecessor company from BHP. And then he became an entrepreneurial independent geologist, first founding a small, sort of traditional, I think sort of is a good term for telegraph exploration, and then finally Rose and Associates, which is, I think, the sort of the signature capstone of his career. I would describe his career vision, as I understand it, to be this: to bring expertise to us, the professionals who practice business expertise, to the professionals who practice petroleum geology. And that's something that's been, I think, very important to our profession. Through Rose and Associates and Pete's work, he's taken the concepts relative to the petroleum business that have been developed by himself and others, Bob McGill and Ed Capon in particular, and others. And he has, in effect, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, trained much of the petroleum industry in practical theory and application of the concepts. The business concepts of risk analysis, quantifying uncertainty, exploration economics, and play analysis. And I believe the result of his work has been a huge tangible benefit to our profession. Increased respect from colleagues, including engineers. That was a joke. A serious joke. Increased credibility from management of companies, from investors, from Wall Street, from the public, and from government regulators for our profession. And of course, given the events of the past few years and the Enron and era and so forth, that's a very, very serious value that he has contributed to our profession. Pete's client list is essentially a who's who of the global petroleum industry. He's consulted, and Rose and Associates has been retained by national oil companies, major oil companies, independents of all sizes, both in the U.S. and internationally, and small entrepreneurial E&P organizations. His positive and pervasive influence is, I think, perhaps best symbolized in something that's sitting on the table in front of all of you, the logo for the 2006 APG annual meeting. And you'll notice we've actually gone to his teachings and writings, and one of the major themes for our convention is delivering on promises. And I think you'll see that as a very pioneering and leading point for the great convention we're going to have here in Houston later this year. So please join me in welcoming my friend, associate, fellow geologist, Pete Rose.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be here. Thank the Houston Geological Society for including me in this august and distinguished group. I want to acknowledge a couple of people. Alice has made a great sacrifice coming down from Dallas, where she's keeping company with her 8-day-old granddaughter. She'll show you pictures. And my stepson Wally Reed and his wife Kim Wally was named, many of you don't know this, Wally was named after his great-grandfather, Wallace Pratt. You can see I married well. You know, such events as this offer really good opportunities for mentoring, for passing along received wisdom. Although sometimes the conveyed wisdom may not be geological, may not be what you expected. Years ago, I had dinner with Jay Mull, a salty old successful mid-continent wildcatter, then in his late 70s. I asked him after dinner, Jay, you've had a really long and colorful, successful career. Can you pass along any fundamental wisdom that you've picked up during a lifetime of prospecting? And I thought I was going to get some insight about structural geology or seismic prospecting or something like that. And he sat back and thought for a minute and said, well, I guess I've learned that it's awful easy to borrow more money than you ought to. In that vein, I'm one of these people that believes when somebody asks you to come and speak, you need to give them something. So here's a list of useful epigrams that I have compiled over the years, which if they are useful to you, that's fine. If not, you can leave them at the door. But we call them Rose's Rules, and we used to laugh about them in our little company, but I started trying to remember all these things. And I'm now up to 61, and I remember 2 more tonight, so we'll have to have a revised list. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. Fairly sheltered childhood. Went to school at the same grade school all the way through 6th grade. So most of my 6th grade classmates were the same ones I started 1st grade with. But the Austin School Board redefined the school attendance districts in 1947. So I, of all my old classmates, would go to a different junior high school for 7th grade, one attended by what my mother described as the rougher element of Austin society. I was a skinny kid, shy and thoroughly intimidated. I didn't know one soul in the new school, which is much larger. So every day after class, I stopped by the school library and checked out a book. Took it home, and after my homework, read it through, often finishing in the wee hours. Before class the next morning, I'd return it to the library. After class that afternoon, I'd check out another book, take it home, read it, and so on through the entire school year. By the beginning of 8th grade, I had become a natural speed reader and a voracious bibliophile. I mean, I can even get fascinated with a cereal box. Today, I usually have 2 or 3 books going at once, and typically devour about a dozen books a month. 2 or 3 books going at once, and typically devour about a dozen books per month. The moral, I think, is that our responses to adversity can enrich our lives immeasurably, as reading has mine. And those of you who read the APG columns come to recognize that there's always going to be a little book recommendation down at the bottom. Boy Scouting was a very important early influence. It reinforced the diversity of my already broad interest, and it introduced me to the idea of planned sequential advancement through the Merit Badge program. One of my very first achievements was becoming an Eagle Scout. Scouting also introduced me to geology, and I had never wavered from a career interest in geology from the age of 14. It also offered me my first exposure to teaching through as a camp counselor. I was lucky to attend the University of Texas at Austin, where I received a BS and MA degree majoring in geology, where I came under the influence of really great teachers and researchers such as Bob Folk, Bill Mulberger, Charlie Bell, Ronald DeFord, and Virgil Barnes. Hook 'em horns. One of the important decisions I made in the summer of 1959 was to join Shell in Houston. On the job application form was a list of specialties that I was supposed to check off. The closest I could find was stratigrapher, because that's kind of what I was doing, carbonate stratigraphy at the University of Texas. When I arrived in Houston, I discovered that stratigrapher was synonymous with micropaleontologist. So I was a bug picker for a couple of years. It offered important learning experiences that I never would have gained otherwise. I served in Houston, Miami, Corpus Christi, New Orleans with high-quality people like Baxter Adams, John Shelton, Bob Ginsberg, Gene Shin, Bob Dunham, Ted Cook, Rufus LeBlanc, Frank Lozo, Mike Lloyd, Ray Thomason, Billy Flowers. And later on, I rejoined Shell, where I ran into one of our other distinguished members of this panel, Bert Valley. But that's another story. I'd like to just discuss very quickly a few contributions, things that I've worked on that today I feel pretty good about it. And looking at this, I think at this sort of retrospective, one is inclined to be looking for themes. And to me, the thing that I felt like kept coming up was the idea of geoscience at its interface with society, the practical applications of geology to the human condition. I also see strong elements of being a change agent, which I can tell you is always exciting and sometimes very uncomfortable, and a fairly strong tradition in professional service. My PhD dissertation at the University of Texas was on the Edwards, that Jeff referred to it, was published by the UT Bureau in 1972, and it integrated the surface of the Edwards Plateau, which had never been mapped, with subsurface area covering totally about 20,000 square miles. And it established the stratigraphic architecture of the Edwards Group, which led in turn directly to the delineation of internal aquifers and aquitaries, and that enabled detailed understanding of groundwater movement in the Edwards Underground Aquifer, the sole water source for San Antonio and adjacent towns such as Uvalde, Hondo, New Braunfels, San Marcos, and so on. Now that understanding was key to the evolution of a successful regional regulatory council which oversaw this essential aquifer, this water resource on which the economy of the region depends. That work has turned out to be the definitive work on the Edwards. And now I want to come back to the idea of being a legend. I can tell you I certainly don't feel like a legend, but I will tell you a story that applies. About 15 years ago, I was at a geological meeting, and I was looking at the posters, and I'd seen that there was a paper on the Edwards, and I came and found it. There was a very nice young woman who had finished her master's degree, and she was doing a study of a particular area of the Edwards. And I introduced myself, and I noticed she got this funny look on her face, and we had a nice conversation, and I visited for a while, and then I went on about my business. And later on, I saw her professor. I said, "That's a very nice thesis that I saw there about this young woman." And I said, "But she seemed to have a kind of a funny reaction when I introduced myself." He said, "Yes, she thought you were dead." In 1974, I set up a task force responsible for conducting probabilistic resource appraisal in the USGS, and their first report was published in 1975. That group has continued, now expanded, and continues to this day under the leadership of Tom Albrandt, whom I hired in 1974. The USGS group now addresses global petroleum resource issues on a place scale and provides sound counsel to the U.S. government and the world on global energy resources. I could only last about 3 years with the USGS. I mean, everybody's glad to see me go as I was to leave. That's probably the first time that I actually became a change agent. And I found that change was possible, but only to a limited degree. In late 1983, AAPG invited Ed Capen, who was with ARCO at the time, Bob McGill, who had just retired from Exxon, and myself, to design a new course on prospect evaluation. As a matter of fact, Dick Bishop, who's here tonight, was part of that selection. Ed and Bob were both statisticians, economists, exceptional teachers. I was just a dumb geologist, prospector, and I learned a great deal from them over the years. We continued to modify, expand, and improve our material, teaching this evolving 4-day course once or twice a year through 1991 when Bob McGill, who was getting pretty frail health, dropped out permanently. Capen and I then invited his sidekick, Bob Clapp, also from ARCO, to succeed McGill. And both of them were retiring from ARCO. And we continued to offer this still evolving course, now called Evaluating and Managing Petroleum Risk, for APG and then others through 1996 when that partnership dissolved. Meanwhile, as part of my own independent sole proprietor consulting practice, I had also begun offering my own version of the course to a few corporate clients. My revision, or my version of it, contained more geological material than Ed and Bob were comfortable with. But I found that it really did resonate, and geologists seemed to be interested in it. When Bob McGill retired in year-end 1989, he referred his corporate clients to me. And I made a key decision, one of those really important decisions in your life, in late 1989 to self-vend those courses rather than to work through a middleman or a marketing group. This was an extremely beneficial decision, which in retrospect was probably worth $3 or $4 million to me. At any rate, Alice and I began traveling the world in 1990. She took care of the logistics and managed classroom mechanics, and I taught. I taught the course 26 times in 1990 and 23 times in 1991. We've always made it a point to stop at the end of the year and take a look at the books and see how we did. So at year-end 1991, we reviewed our business results, remembering that we had nearly gone belly up in 1986, 87, 88. So we took a look at how things looked in 1991, and Alice and I looked at each other and said, you know, this is pretty good business. And there's no risk in it. So we paid down our debt and started to specialize the practice in risk analysis. Matter of fact, I sold my last prospect in 1991, but Peter, I got another one coming next year. In 1993, I began teaching the risk analysis of exploration plays, as well as other versions of the basic course for managers and executives. Marathon had built proprietary Excel-based software that utilized our principles, and I helped them license it to another corporate client, just getting two clients together. They were kind enough to split the $10,000 license fee with me. About a month later, Marathon came to me and said, you know, we don't want to be in the software licensing business. We want you to be in the software licensing business. So I licensed Marathon software of our risk analysis procedure, building in some overrides for Ed Capen and Bob Clapp, who had been involved. And then I meant that I was then adding a third component to my teaching and consulting business. That entailed adding new professionals, especially people who knew something about computers and software, because I certainly didn't. Pete Rose managing a software company would be like putting a cowpoke in a spacesuit. So I organized the firm that eventually morphed into Rose & Associates, LLP, which grew from Elizabeth Sherry, our office manager, Alice and me in 1997, to a thriving partnership of 5 partners. Today, 4 associates and 4 clerical staff 8 years later. The software now in several forms has become the industry standard, licensed by more than 50 companies worldwide, and the firm over that period grew at an annual compounded rate of 33%. We gradually sold our shares to incoming partners. I passed managing partner duties over to Gary Citron, who is here tonight. Gary, where are you? Passed those over in 2002, and Alice and I sold our last shares in January of this year. What I am proudest of is that the firm had its very best year in 2005 when I was no longer a principal. In 2001, the APG published my book, Risk Analysis and Management of Petroleum Exploration Ventures, based on all these evolved materials. The book is approaching its 4th printing and has been translated into Chinese, and we are now discussing the Russian translation. Alice and I refused our author's royalty, instead using those funds to reduce the purchase price of the book. More than 20,000 geoscientists and engineers and executives have now learned these methods around the world. And I take a lot of satisfaction from having been part of constructive change in the E&P industry, whereby geoscientists and engineers could themselves measure their prospects and plays realistically and consistently so they could function as professionals rather than promoters. And the final thing I'd like to talk about here a little bit is AAPG. The association has been an essential part of my professional life. It's provided repeated opportunities for growth, business contacts, a worldwide circle of friends, and a lot more recognition than I ever merited. I never took part in some committee or conference that I didn't get a lot more out of than I ever put in. I believe that service is not only a privilege, but it's a moral obligation to your community. By choice, I will have been gainfully unemployed for the last half of my term as president-elect and all of my presidential year. Partly because I promised to serve as an agent of change, the job has turned out to be demanding and often exasperating. But I like to think that the association, especially the Tulsa headquarters, has made very substantial and irreversible progress in its effectiveness, responsiveness, and financial accountability over the past 18 months. And the next 6 months we'll see important additional changes. I want here to recognize Rick Fritz, who has been very amenable to this progressive change, and the association is well served by his presence as director. AAPG faces the crucial choice this spring, whether it wants to be an authentic international association of geological scientists, as it claims to be, and as its strategic plan mandates, or, by choice, an increasingly insular North American society bypassed by the progressive globalization of the E&P industry, as well as the locations of most of the world's remaining petroleum resources and its major expanding economies. The specific issue is whether to add to the executive committee a new officer specifically representing the interests of the 6 international regions. The Houston Geological Society, the largest of AAPG's affiliated societies, holds the key to this very important decision. I hope you HGS leaders here tonight will persuade your HGS colleagues, especially your delegates, to AAPG's House of Delegates to embrace an expansive future rather than to endorse an isolationist future. You have the opportunity this spring to be a visionary leader, and I hope you will do so. Well, what are some career lessons learned? First, don't limit yourself. Every new assignment offers challenging opportunities for growth and advancement. I was a micropaleontologist, carbonate sedimentologist, a well site geologist, regional stratigrapher, resource assessor, frontier playmaker, prospector, expert witness, and E&P risk analyst, as well as research director, chief geologist, sole proprietor, entrepreneur, managing partner, and society president. Some new assignments I sought. Others were ordered by my superiors. Overall, it's been a blast. Second, modern society badly needs more geological input. Geologists should be contributing much more to society's understanding of its life situation. The geological perspective is essential to consideration and decisions as to long-range questions about mineral resources, environmental conditions, groundwater supply, and land use. Today, most of the important elements of such questions are not being addressed by the people best able to. This is our profession, and we, as a profession, are not stepping up. Incidentally, economics is almost always the other invisible counterpart to most of these issues. Third, the practice of petroleum exploration and production contains an inherent conflict that geoscientists need to acknowledge up front. Because of substantial and economically irreducible uncertainty, geologists must first dream, imagine, intuit, and approximate, using an inexact science applied to Mother Earth, who is a coarse filter. This inevitably personalizes our plays and prospects, and combined with ambition, makes most geoscientists optimistic. Prospecting is a heroic activity. But our prospects The fruits of our labors must be evaluated as financial risk ventures, of which companies carry out dozens, even hundreds every year. That means that the E&P business is a repeated trials game in which consistency and objectivity is necessary for sustained success of the portfolio. Someone must measure every prospect. Consistency is very important. This leaves us two general choices. First, geologists must themselves objectively evaluate their own prospects, or second, someone else must measure them, someone who cannot be as familiar as the geologist was. Self-discipline versus gatekeepers. The choice is up to us. I think geologists should not give control of their professional product to other people. But this requires acquiring the skills and the professional discipline to measure their prospects. Thanks for your attention.